So I think the greatest misconception in the public is that the EPA is actually making a final decision rather than providing independent advice. And that's a misconception, I think, across the board from the community, from proponents, and even from government. Everyone wants the EPA to be on their side.
Yes.
Like, can you just make that decision? And then that will block everybody else out, essentially, because then they would have the ability to say, oh, the independent EPA said this. And in my mind, that's when we're in the production of fig leaves rather than actually protecting biodiversity. And a fig leaf is an invasive species.
Today on Tell Us All About It, we're joined by someone who's spent many years in the Western Australian's most important environmental authority and across most of the environmental decisions that are made within WA. Lee McIntosh is the former Deputy Chair of the EPA and sometime acting Chair of the EPA. And she's been directly involved in shaping how our state balances out development, biodiversity, climate risk and long-term sustainability. Lee's a lawyer and has previously worked with Mallesons along with most of the old school legal fraternity and its various incarnations and the Environmental Defender's Office, and is now a barrister with Francis Burt Chambers. I think this probably brings something of a unique view to environmental protection under the EPA Act. Purpose of the conversation, I suppose, is to explore the role of the EPA, the challenges that facing WA's environment, the realities of decision-making behind the scenes, and her personal philosophy on what it means to protect the places we value, work and live in. It's a rare chance to hear from somebody who understands both the complexity and the urgency of environmental protection in Western Australia. So I'm sure it's going to be a fascinating conversation. Welcome, Lee.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with a bit of an opening question. You've spent a significant part of your career shaping environmental governance in the state. Before we get into the big issues, what originally drew you into this after your legal work? Why the EPA?
I had done 20 years working as an environmental and approvals lawyer in the corporate sector. So I think it's pretty natural for anyone who's done 20 years of anything to think, what's next? Opportunities to be on the EPA don't come up very often, particularly in a leadership position on the EPA. So I thought this literally may never happen again. So that's why it was sort of good timing for that as well. I was quite curious about how it actually worked on the inside. Lots of views, as I think everyone in WA does, about how it should work. And what's actually going on in there from the outside. In the legal world, you work in small teams, and this was an opportunity for me to get new skills of managing a big team and really doing it in a leadership role. So there were the personal reasons, but I suppose the big reason was mainly I just had a lot of ideas about how we could do efficient environmental protection. I have not met anyone who doesn't actually want to protect the environment. No one wants to be a vandal. And so I think there's a lot of commonality where we often perceive there to be opposition, and the crunchiness comes when there's inefficiencies in a system. And so, if something takes a project that's taking 5 years to get through a system, I mean, even I probably don't want to protect the environment anymore at that point because it's just taken too long. And that I could see a lot of things proponents could do better, a lot of things lawyers and consultants could do better, and a lot of things that I thought the EPA could do better. So I'm like, hi, I'm Lee and I'm here to help. I've got all these things I can join a lot of dots to do environmental protection efficiently.
Do you think bringing that legal eye to the legislation and to how people were doing things, both, I guess, from the EPA's perspective, but also from a proponent's perspective, do you think that complicated your view on the role?
No, I think what lawyers can do, I think that other professions aren't as mired in, is understanding all of the different perspectives at the same time and picking a path and advocating for that path and being okay that it might not be perfect or it might not be the only thing or someone might be unhappy about it, because law in a Western democracy is a contest of ideas.
Yep.
And the legislature appoints, in this case, an independent EPA to make decisions. And as long as we have a reasonable, well thought out, transparent way to make them, then the fact that they might not be popular or please everyone, I think, is not surprising. But lawyers are quite comfortable to be in that space. So that's why I think I could be a good advocate in the EPA for efficient environmental protection.
So when you look back at things, what stands out to you as a defining moment from a personal perspective within that role?
I loved it when a proponent came in and said, Lee, we adopted your outcomes approach to doing our EIA, and it was efficient internally for us. And I got feedback from the officers who were assessing that it was a very efficient way for them to do their assessment as well. So when I mean that, I mean focusing on, it's called the environmental outcomes focused approach. We did a guidance on that very early on in my tenure. And what it does is really say, put the environment first, don't put the process first. The process is there essentially for the object of protecting the environment from a development. So it's not making a national park, it is having a development. And having that focus on, right, what are the significant environmental things? It gets you to focus on them straight away, because you need to know what they are to set environmental outcomes. You don't need to set an outcome for something that's not significant. And it just gives you some guide rails. Otherwise, projects can seem very, unlimited. Like, we could go anywhere, we could do anything. And usually it's the mine planners and the engineers who end up setting the constraints. So having environmental outcomes focused means that you're putting the environment at the same level of guiding where projects should go. So this particular proponent said it really helped their board to be able to make decisions about, well, no, we're not going to blow that hill up, so don't even try and put your waste rock dump, next to that or something like that. Or we're not going to have that much impact on that waterway because the traditional owners have told us that's really important. So it just let them have constraints. The board were happy to say from an ESG perspective, no, we don't want to do those things. So it helped them then be ready to put the management responses and the avoidance responses in place straight away. So they were operationally ready to go. They had efficient decision making, and it meant that our officers were being given documents that were quite far advanced from what they normally are, had the good science to justify what the important things were, and it meant there was a very simple conditions regime we could put in place as well, and not, which is my pet hate and a sign of a project that I don't think's been done very efficiently, which is a ton of management plans. Yep. But it also is hard as a decision maker to go, I think the environment's going to be okay because there's 1,000 pages of management plans. But that's not helping me. The environment's going to be okay because there's a clear condition that we've assessed is able to be met, saying you're not going to have impact on more than 100 metres around that waterway or something.
Coming back to that outcomes-based condition making, rather than here's a management plan that should get you to that outcome. That's the outcome. Let's see how you get there. That's up to you.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just the outcome condition, that's the end piece of the puzzle. It's having that outcomes focus the whole way through your project. Because you can't just do an assessment and then think about the outcome at the end. That's nearly impossible. It's having that focus on from the project design through to the project decision making and all the way through.
You mentioned before, obviously, the core purpose of the EPA is really to protect the environment and its values. What do you think the biggest misconceptions the public has about what the EPA does and how it operates are?
So first, I'd say the EPA is definitely there to protect the environment, but how it does it is really through providing independent advice to government about the environment, so then they can make the decisions about projects and other planning, which then balances up the need for social and economic things. So the EPA provides that independent advice maybe about a project, also about strategic matters, also about policies. And it's not actually often that Parliament is far-sighted enough to legislate to have that, to say, please, we want to set up a body with independents to give us advice. And both parties have basically left that alone because they can see that having that independent advice adds significant value to the part of the process, and it might be inconvenient and it might be imperfect and it might be in the way, but it's actually invaluable. So independence is invaluable there. So I think the greatest misconception in the public is that the EPA is actually making a final decision rather than providing independent advice. And that's a misconception, I think, across the board from the community, from proponents, and even from government. Everyone wants the EPA to be on their side.
Yes.
Like, can you just make that decision? And then that will block everybody else out, essentially, because then they would have the ability to say, oh, the independent EPA said this. And in my mind, that's when we're in the production of fig leaves rather than actually protecting biodiversity, and a fig leaf is an invasive species.
Yes.
So you don't want proponents doing that. You don't want government doing that. You don't want the community doing that. So you need there to be, an understanding that the EPA is providing an independent advice. So help us do that. It was a lot clearer, that role of the EPA then, when we had an office of the EPA, because that was a definite a standalone office and everything about it was touch and felt about the EPA. But we still have our statutory independence. We have 16, separate statutory functions. So we're still quite different than a department. Because that's another misconception, that people think we are like an environmental regulator or an EPA in other states. Most other states have an EPA that has regulatory functions. We don't have any of those things. And I think that independence and not being a regulator means that we have a greater ability as well, which is again far-sighted of the legislature to put in place, which is being able to talk to other government boards who are in similar positions as well.
Obviously, there's a lot of information that comes into the EPA in relation to a proposal that you've got to consider from proponents, from the community, from within government. How does the EPA weigh up that scientific uncertainty when making those recommendations?
By knowing from the outset you're never going to have all the information and being okay with that. And there's, I suppose, a cascading way of looking at it. When there's a threat of serious or irreversible environmental harm, then the precautionary principle is enlivened. But that doesn't happen as often as people think. That's really quite significant things, and we are legally bound not to adopt the precautionary principle unless that legal threshold is met. So until we are satisfied there is actually a threat of serious or irreversible harm, the precautionary principle doesn't apply. And there's a very good judgment by His Honour Justice Colvin on this, which explains, I think, helpfully for the community group which raised it, but also for proponents, I would say, in government to understand what that means, explains how the precautionary principle works. So when we do have and there are some cases there where you know that there's that risk, then the precautionary principle applies. Outside of those cases, doesn't mean that you're just like, we're not going to acknowledge the scientific uncertainty. There's lots of the normal toolkits that environmental scientists would be familiar with. So, making conservative assumptions is how you can deal with some uncertainty. Making sure that you've considered the worst case scenario, and if that's what still meets the EPA objectives, then that's fine. You can live with that uncertainty. By looking at preventative actions as well. So you don't need to chase all those rabbits down all those holes if you can just avoid the rabbit holes in the first place. Another way to deal with it is by being focused on what's significant in the first place. You don't need to chase, again, I should have a better analogy than rabbits in holes because they're pests, but anyway, woylies down holes if the woylies aren't significant. And if you have an outcomes-based approach, then that can also mean that you're focusing on significance and the outcomes, so that the details don't matter that much. And also, I found the most helpful decision-making principle that I in the Act was the one of intergenerational equity. It's just a bit fundamental that you shouldn't be doing things that are now that prejudice future generations. And once you step back and ask yourself that can actually help you in all decisions, but particularly where there's scientific uncertainty as well.
Does the EPA have luxury of doing that? I mean, they obviously get the information and the officers' reports and everything else. Are you able to sort of pull yourself away from that and actually have a think about that?
That's our job.
Objectively?
That's our job, yeah. We rely on the officers to be pulling all of that information together, and effectively the officers really have two jobs, I think. One is to and it's very hard, and I really respect what they do. One is to influence the proponents along the way to make the project better and better and better environmentally. They are the officers who support the EPA, have a wide range of knowledge across a lot of environmental sectors and a lot of projects. So they're the ones that can usually work with proponents to say, that's probably going to be too much of an impact, do this instead. Then they have to essentially turn that part of their brain off and go, right, the project is now what it is. Is that, stepping back in the cold light of day, going to be consistent with the EPA's objectives? It might be the best it can be. That still might not be good enough. And so that is the job that the assessment piece does after the project has done that. And EPA is meant, what we are doing is holding that line and in a leadership way and in our analysis of a way of the project against those guiding principles of what are the principles in the Act and what are the EPA's objectives for the environment.
Might be a little bit of a controversial question. You mentioned obviously that objectivity and the thresholds. How often does that threshold get exceeded and you have to actually say to a proponent, you know what, this is not going to work. This is not something that we can contemplate in its current form. It's probably a bit more of a behind-the-scenes sort of question around what the EPA does and how its process of undertaking environmental impact assessment. And you might have a lot of the people in the community saying, well, it's just EPA is just carte blanche, let it go through. Does that happen a lot behind the scenes, that you just say, you know what, this is not going to happen, or you need to make some significant changes before we're comfortable?
It absolutely happens. I'm not going to be able to give you any numbers.
No, yeah.
It absolutely happens, and that's part of the EPA's role.
I think that's important for people to understand, is that just because the EPA seem to be recommending for approval doesn't mean to say that there's no recommendations against approval, or that there are things that go on for projects that, you know what, this was never going to get up. And it's probably only the big public ones that which make the papers that people see.
Yep.
Okay. So in that regard, what are the most urgent environmental challenges facing the WA at the moment, do you think?
I think not focusing on ecological functioning is the biggest risk that we have. I think we're very focused on individual species and individual elements. So EPA factors are a helpful way of organising EIA, but we don't put them together enough to think about how's ecological functioning actually working here. And there's a lot that means that we missed some potential impacts, and also means we miss a lot of opportunities to do things smarter and protect a lot of things at the same time.
But that's inherently part and parcel of the EIA process. Resources, a proponent will come in with a proposal, and it is very much focused around that proposal. The blinkers are on. That's what we want to get approved. They're not kind of worried about anything else. How does a proponent, say in the mining space, develop responsibly with that ecosystem or ecological functioning in mind?
So that is by having an outcomes focus in the first place. And once you get back to an outcomes focus, that inherently captures things like ecological functioning because it's big enough to be able to do that. Then you can put all of those different elements together to look at it from a functioning perspective. It's what cumulative assessment does. It's what holistic assessment does. And, ideally, and this is never going to happen, you would have strategic plans for all the areas which did all of that, on an environmental regional basis, which had upfront guidance around what ecological functioning parameters were needed. But we're not going to stop the world for 20 years until we get that. And so we have this imperfect system, but it doesn't mean that we don't need to ask the question about how does this actually impact on overall ecological functioning as a central part of it. People love compartmentalising. Scientists particularly love classifying and compartmentalising. And so part of the EPA role at the end is to lift back up, essentially asking yourself, is it okay?
Have there been people or proponents that have done it well?
Yeah, that one that I explained, I probably shouldn't say their name out loud, but that was an example where they had their project from the start to then when they adopted an outcomes approach. Yep. That was a very big journey for them and one that they found successful, as I said, in a range of parts for their business as well.
I'm just trying to work out who that might have been. I've got a good idea of which one it might be. And I won't throw any names out there, but I think it was gold mining. Would it be gold mining? Anyway, let's move on from that. Is that common across industry? I mean, you've got, say, mining clients who might do certain things well. Oil and gas, yes, no. I mean, or is there a nice spread of people who are doing it well across the board?
It's quite... It depends on a lot of different things. So on the advisors that they've got, and I would firmly encourage lots of environmental consultants to move away from management plans.
Yes.
It depends on the officers that they've got helping them. Our officers are great, but lots of them are new. And this might be the first thing that they're dealing with, so they don't necessarily have the experience to go straight to focusing on outcomes because they want to get their hands on something first. It depends on how urgent, how long a project's already been in a timescale in the timeline, whether they can go, right, well, we'll adopt this approach or not. I think that there seems to be a Gordian knot in there as well where proponents say, we just want to do what the regulator tells us. Yes. And the consultants will... And so brief that out to the consultants, and the consultants can say, well, the proponent told us just to do this, and then everyone goes to the regulator, and the regulator is not the boss of the project and does not get told, I would say, 90% of what the issues are, but everyone walks out of that meeting with the regulator saying, oh, they told us to do this, so we're just going to do this now. And that's a lot of what I spend my time as a legal advisor undoing that and saying, well, they told you that, but that's because you didn't really ask them the right question, and it's not their project anyway. So take that into account, but you have the EPA practice guide. You know your project better than anyone. It is your responsibility to do it. So within that Gordian loop, no one's really owning the decision-making for the project. Everyone's just saying, I need to do this because X told me to. And X is saying, well, I needed to do that because Y told me to. So no one's stepping back and...
I think that's an interesting point. I think if you go in and don't ask the right questions, you're never going to get the right answers that you need. Whereas if you go in and provide the outcomes, as you were saying earlier, that you think you can achieve within the framework of the Act, it makes the EIA
100%.
process.
You're all talking about the right question.
Yeah.
Then.
Well, it's not even questions at the end of the day. It's those answers that you're actually aiming to achieve.
Yeah.
When we consider the industry as a whole and looking at what we've just talked about, do you think there are any environmental risks that we're underestimating in project approvals? What are we missing from an EIA? What are we doing poorly?
I think offsets is an area that is often underdone. proponents spend a lot of time figuring out what their significant impact is, and then if it's significant and they need to offset, for the EPA, it's just as important whether that offset will work and is it achievable and is it secure. That's just as important as what the impact was in the first place, because you're not even talking about offsets unless you've got a significant impact in the first place. So it's already important, and it can be the tipping point between whether the EPA recommends approval or not. So you need a lot of confidence in that offset. But because it's considered to be in the future, there's usually a lot less information provided.
It's an interesting topic, and probably one that we could do an entire podcast on its own, particularly with the security side of things with respect to offsets, and also we haven't really got any sort of performance data in relation to offsets that we can actually say, you know what, that has achieved what it was intended to achieve. There are a number of proponents out there who have said that they've secured or rehabbed 70% of their disturbance. And you look at the time that it takes for certain vegetation to re-establish and get a proper understory and overstory, and we're talking hundreds of years. And how do you resolve that side of things as an EPA member when you don't really have that data to sort of demonstrate that an offset can be achieved?
Well, that's the challenge, and that's what we're asking proponents to do. So throughout the EIA practice guide and through the old procedures manual, it was quite clear that you need to assess offsets, not just give us some information about them, but they're an assessment matter the same as anything else. So they need that same level of rigour brought to them.
Do you think there's a point at which you would say, you know what, we wouldn't accept an offset? And obviously you're out of the seat now because we don't have that certainty, and the project cannot go ahead because we've got no confidence in those offsets.
100%.
Okay.
That happens. What do I think is still potentially underestimated? Lots of water impacts. I think in WA, water is so important, and water modelling is a dark art.
Yes. Water legislation's a dark art.
Oh, that's just
Alex Gardner has been pushing for that legislation to be updated for, I don't know, however long I've known him.
Yeah.
And it's still lagging behind. Was it 1914?
1914. Irrigation.
Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to say about what we are underestimating is more of a process one. I think we're underestimating the impact on people of being in this EIA world, of not feeling empowered enough to try and just focus on the environmental outcomes. We all silo everyone. That makes them feel not empowered to influence or to take the best thing they could do for the environment. They're not feeling great about that, and so then you care less, and you just get a system of people who are feeling quite disempowered. But as I said, I don't know anyone that wants to be an environmental vandal. Everyone's got, a reason that they want to feel good about protecting the environment. So we need to empower them as much as we can to do that. So I don't think we do that very well, and we underestimate the importance of people making good choices that they feel good about in their jobs all of the time.
So what role do you think the community plays in relation to environmental decision-making? Is there anything that community could be doing better or differently?
The community and supporting them to help us make better environmental decisions is one of the things that I wished I was able to do more in my tenure on the EPA. As part of our the strategic plan that I was involved in pulling together, we had one of our objectives was to help people participate in a more meaningful way in EIA. So I have had people crying as part of the community saying, it's just like 3,000 pages and I was up till 3 o'clock at night and I don't, and they're feeling wholly responsible and for analysing all of the proponents' documents to give it to the EPA. And I'm feeling like, that's meant to be my job. I'm on the EPA. So, but there's such an amazing amount of knowledge in the community. I don't think it's best spent reading 3,000 pages of stuff. So I actually think I implemented a scientific advisory council to help the EPA when I was acting as chair. And I think it would be good to implement a community advisory council as well that is able to present things to the EPA and assist the community to provide their arguments as well. In the legal system, there's something called a contradictor, which is where a judge is being asked to answer something, is only getting one side of the story. So the judge will say, to actually decide this properly, I need a contradictor. I need the other side of the story brought to me so then I can make. Otherwise, I'm too scared that I'm going to miss something, and that's how I will decide this matter properly. So a community advisory council, which is able to provide that information to the EPA, would serve that function, and also a supporting function to the community to say, look, you need to focus on the significance of things. This is where to put the energy. This is a good way to prosecute that argument.
Yes.
Also, I would encourage them to work with the proponents a lot more. Otherwise, it's a bit like going to your mum or dad and saying, they said this to me, and the proponent's like, well, they always do this. And and in the legal system as well, that a judge, they're not going to decide who's right or wrong. They're just going to decide the issue that's in front of them. So
based on the legislation and what that says and precedent.
Yeah.
Do you think there's anything else you would redesign from the EPA perspective or the environmental governance system in WA if you had the opportunity to do so? I'm a big advocate for the EPA Act itself. I think it works well. It has the independence. I've worked within it for however many years now. So I'm a bit precious with respect to it. But is there anything you would change?
I'm not around the Act so much. I would like there to be an independent office of the EPA again. I think there has been a lot of advantages in being part of a big department, but what you lose then as an independent EPA is basically the ability to function as a board, which everyone expects we are.
Yes.
But you're a board without any ability to manage your staff or to, do any of those normal things which are normal to lead and ensure and, have accountability for implementation.
And that was trialled, though, a good few years ago now. And I think one of the biggest issues was trying to find the resources to support the Office of the EPA and the competition between the various agencies to try and pick the best and brightest to do that work.
Yeah.
What would change there, do you think?
Oh, your question wasn't what would I do within the current resource framework?
No. I mean, I think I'm always one of the consistencies that I have is that the government needs more resources and needs more finances to be able to put into the EPA to support its staff and to bring more staff in. And I think that's something that needs to happen across the board. Otherwise, we're going to still have slow functioning services because there's an awful lot of work out there and not necessarily the best outcomes to being achieved.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree. I think from government's perspective, they would say, yeah, everyone tells me that.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's my job to allocate the resources as efficiently as I do. And that's why I think we need to have really efficient environmental protection-focused systems in place before you go asking for more resources, because you're not going to get them if you haven't already got your own house in order.
Probably a couple final questions. Difficult decisions for the EPA. I mean, imagine every decision is difficult. But what are your principles that have guided you when you've had to make some difficult or controversial decisions? Maybe, obviously, as a board member, but also as a board, the deputy chair, but also personally as well.
So from a legislative perspective, I find the EPA objects and principles very helpful. There's one principle that's about economic valuation or something. I don't really use that. I don't really know what that means. We haven't really adopted it in WA. We don't have any regulations about that. But otherwise, those principles, and particularly intergenerational equity, I find sitting with that often leads to the right answer. I think the EPA's factor objectives are very helpful. As I said, they're not the whole story. You've got cumulative and holistic, which needs to be done as well. As far as making other decisions, it would be, I'd try and hold myself, and then I would expect this of other people as well, to care calmly.
Yeah.
So
you can see that, yes.
You need to...
There's a rationality around it.
That's right. And I very much, as a lawyer, no surprises, very much focus on reasons and having reasons for things. So I don't like it when reports that the department will have this will be no surprise to them. If something says the EPA considered this acceptable, I rail against that, because that's not a reason. That's like saying I've got a magic wand of acceptability. I need to know why. And then because that then it's sort of a due processing to the proponent and the consultants who've done all this work. Like, why is it okay or why is it not okay? You do that. It means that reason means that you can make consistent decisions next time. It means that the community can understand things. They might not love the outcome. They might not have loved the process, but it's understandable. It means other proponents in the future can learn from that. So there's such a lot to love about reasons, and there was actually a good WA Ombudsman report in the early 2000s on the benefit to government decision-making of providing written reasons for decisions. And the EPA has always done that. That's what Section 44 reports are. And so I think showing a clear line of reasoning in those reports is very important, and that's what I would try and do, rather than them being a big list of information or reports. It's the reasoning that I think is most valuable there.
And that calm rationality, have there been times where you've sort of made a decision or had to take a stand where you've sort of said, you know what, no or yes, where it's been unpopular, either within the department or within the framework of the EPA or with proponents or the community?
I don't think I've ever made a decision that is popular. So I'd probably say the other way around. Popularity is not something that just drives me, really. I would more judge the decision and judge my own behaviour by, was it efficient? Was it focused on environmental protection? And was it implementable? And then if it's not popular, then there's probably something else going on there that is not part of my job or not controllable.
So you've never gone home from an EPA sort of decision or a day where you just thought, head in hands, oh my goodness, what has happened?
You just do the best that you can. You can't do any more after that. And it's essentially, so I think 5 years is a good term for an EPA member, because you can't live in a place where no one is very happy with your decisions most of the time. I think you can know that you've made a good decision, but if you're after popularity, you're in a space where the proponent's not going to get everything they like, the community's not going to get everything they like, and other board members may have different views to you. So it's just, popularity is just not the test.
I mean, it's interesting you say that, because I think you've been a very, is the word popular? Very popular EPA board member, and certainly an EPA deputy chair, in relation to how you've gone about things, the pragmatism and the rationality around things. I think the industry and probably the community would probably be on the same side with that. How would you like to be remembered in that role? What are the things that you would like to sort of see progressed from your involvement in the EPA?
I'd love outcomes to be part of how everyone does business, and I would love a focus on significance to be how everyone does business. And if we end up with a system that is efficient and designed to deliver environmental protection, then I think that's a massive win, and a process where people are more able to work together and having less conflict and more able to see each other's point of views. I think having an efficient environmental focused system would absolutely enable that. And then conflict just takes a lot of energy and is energy sapping, and there's such a lot of amazing things that we can do. Like in 10 years, I get excited about thinking about, the renewable energy stuff we can do in WA, the environmental protection things we can do. There's a lot of good intent. We're very, well resourced compared to other parts of the world. We should be able to smash this. We just have to get out of our own way and do it.
So what advice then would you give people who are entering into this field, the consultants or scientists, or even sort of the lawyers and policymakers? What would you tell them if they were coming into the field today?
Probably not very insightful, because it's just the thing that I hold myself to, which is, again, care, but calmly do that. Reasons and science are your friends. They'll guide you to the right decisions. They will let you have integrity before the world, and they will give you an ability to live with the outcome of what you've been a part of.
I think that's a really good way of finishing up the episode. So, look, I really want to say thank you for your thoughtful and rational and calmly caring insights into the work of the EPA and I guess the broader challenges that you face. Like every assessment and every policy and every recommendation, there are a lot of people involved in that process, and I think it's important that people realise that and recognise that it's not an off-the-cuff decision. There's a lot of work that goes on in terms of protection of the long-term well-being of the environment. And I think hopefully something may be sparked out of this conversation for some people listening, a question or a concern or even a bit of hope, as you were sort of mentioning there. That's exactly the point. It's not environmental protection is not an abstract concept, I suppose. We all see it on a daily basis. And as you say, it's that sustainability, that future we're looking at, that helps the decision making. So, look, thanks again for coming in, Lee. Very much appreciated. Thanks for listening to Tell Us All About It. And if you enjoyed the episode, please feel free to share it and get back in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.